Welcome, listeners, to a realm where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and this is Quills and Chills, the podcast that brings you face to face with the masterminds behind the macabre. In each episode, we journey into the minds of horror writers and filmmakers to uncover the secrets lurking within their tales of terror. From classic tales to modern nightmares, we'll traverse the corridors of the human psyche and unravel the threads of dread that keep us turning the pages or sitting out there in the dark. Welcome to Quills and Chills. Hello and welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and today I am thrilled to have the incredible C J Cooke back with me again. You remember her from our previous conversation about her novel, A Haunting in the Arctic. CJ is known for her masterful storytelling, blending psychological suspense with supernatural elements, and her latest book, The Book of Witching, is no exception to that. It is a haunting tale of witchcraft, revenge, and a mother's fierce, fierce love. So welcome back, CJ.
Thanks, Rick. Nice to be back.
So glad you're here. You've been a little busy since we last spoke.
Yes. Yes, 2 books this year. Crazy.
It's insane. Tell us about this book. Tell us all about The Book of Witching.
Certainly. So a long time ago, I think it was actually about 2019, I was researching the Lighthouse Witches. It would have been, 2019. I was researching the Lighthouse Witches and came across a story about a witch trial in Orkney featuring a woman called Alison Balfour. It was the first witch trial in Orkney. It preceded the Scottish witch trials, actually, and it was a very grim tale. We have the trial records of this witch trial, and I mean, I don't want to give away too much, but basically this story really moved me because it really showed the full horror, I think, of the witch trials and the injustice and the particular ways in which women, I think, were mistreated. And I really wanted to write about it, so I put it aside for a while, but it sort of nagged at me, and I decided I would write about it. So I went up to Orkney to do some research last year, and when I was in the archives in Kirkwall, which is the main city, I actually came across some things related to Orcadian folklore, and they really fed into this book. So the Book of Witching actually is a thing. It's an object that I've called the Book of Witching, but it comes from a real piece of Orcadian folklore that was mentioned several times in the archives.
I love the way you've incorporated it into this story, and I love Orkney and how we talked last time about how you research and usually go to a place when you're writing, and I decided I have to Google this and I have to sort of see this place for myself, and it's gorgeous. So I love
really
that you chose it. Yeah, it's really
Orkney's
amazing.
it's a fascinating place. I think I've always been interested in these far-flung places because I'm really curious how people manage and what drives them to stay. If it's so remote, if it's disconnected, then and it maybe impacts, it restricts their choices in terms of careers and so on, then why do they stay? It's a bit easier now with Zoom and all of that. We're a lot more connected now, but still, people had to make these choices. And when I went to Orkney, I was really astonished at how not remote I felt. I felt that they had such a good setup. The community was so vibrant. They had all the amenities. I didn't feel cut off. I mean, certainly there's a lot of islands that I didn't see. So maybe, living out there, maybe you do feel remote in a good way, but I thought it was just wonderful. So I was really, really intrigued.
It has been added to my list of places to visit myself now, so I will definitely get there myself, hopefully very soon. So once again in this book, you've done something that it blows my mind every time I see it. But you've blended two different timelines, and you've done that into one. So what I would think is sort of heartfelt and emotional story that really ties together at the end. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you developed the story and that process about working across two different timelines and how they ultimately sort of, I don't want to say come together, but how they tie together, I guess, at the end.
Yeah, I should say a little bit about those two narratives. So it's a dual timeline book, as with The Lighthouse Witches. I think I was really intrigued when I wrote The Lighthouse Witches, and it had those two timelines, and then similarly with the Ghost Woods, they're a little bit closer, and A Haunting in the Arctic. I'm really interested in how time operates and how the past impacts us in the present. And I think I was wondering with this book if I could do it. I was really interested in writing about a cult, which is in this book. Really interested in that kind of in ideology and how someone can actually get caught up in a cult without sort of realizing it and buy into quite bizarre beliefs, and it's so gradual that they don't even realize how bizarre they are. It's by degrees. So I was very interested in that. I was very interested in writing about the effects of a curse, and that sort of ties into the story that's set in 2024, where the main character Clem is told that her daughter Erin, who went to Orkney on a trip with her friends, is caught up in this terrible burning. She is in hospital with terrible, severe burns. A friend is missing, and her boyfriend is dead. And so I started there, and I was really trying to unpick this for myself. Sometimes it's nice not to know and to use the novel as a way to find out. And if I'm intrigued, then the reader will be intrigued. And I think at the beginning, I was quite nervous about writing these two different stories. This 1594 episode in Orkney, where Alison Balfour is accused of witchcraft and put on trial. And so that required a lot of research. And then how I was going to wed that to the narrative in 2024, where this girl is in hospital. And in some ways, I felt even more nervous because I had two characters who were in a very static position, in that Erin in the 2024 narrative is in the hospital. She's in a bed. How can I create a story where the kind of central character is immobile and actually unconscious for a lot of it? And then with the 1594 narrative, we have a woman who's in prison for a lot of it. So two characters without much agency. And yeah, so I had a bit of a challenge making sure that I could write something that kept moving forward while the characters themselves did not move forward. They did not move very much at all. So that was a new thing, a new challenge as a novelist.
Well, I would say you met that challenge beautifully, because I was kind of struck, especially as I got towards the end of the book, by how, like, as we went between both timelines, I was like, I was glued to the page, and I was like, couldn't wait to get to the next part. But then I wanted to find out what happened with the other part, and it was just the way it just sort of danced back and forth for me. I just I loved it. I could gush all day, but it was
That's good.
great. So I
That's
want to talk.
excellent to hear.
I want to talk a little bit about Clem, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about her journey as she fights to save her daughter while dealing with everything that's surrounding Erin's condition. I'm obviously trying to talk spoiler free as much as possible, but I was wondering if
Yeah,
you could talk a little
yeah.
bit about that development.
Certainly. So Clem is a woman in her mid 40s, and she has a teenage daughter. They live in a flat. She's divorced. She has to deal with her ex-husband. I think I was really interested in writing about family dynamics again in this book, and having to work with someone that she actually detests. She's really angry with her ex-husband, particularly because he's remarried and he's got three young boys and he gives them all his attention. He has a granddaughter that he just barely knows, doesn't see. and he doesn't know anything about Erin's life. But then suddenly, when she calls him out of duty to say, hey, your daughter's in the hospital, there's been a serious episode. And when he comes, it's like they're treated equally. And she has a lot of resentment about that, because she's like, you haven't been there. You don't provide for her financially. You don't even ring her anymore. And so there's a lot of these underlying tensions. And I suppose I was really interested in looking at the tendrils of relationships, and seeing if I didn't know how it was going to go. I won't say how it goes with them, but I was writing this relationship just in an organic, I don't know way, because I wanted to just see if I know the characters well enough, then I can let them figure it out, and we'll see where this takes us. So, and similarly, I wanted to understand a little bit more in terms of why she joins a cult, why she becomes embroiled in something that's so, what's the word, destructive, corrosive, brainwashing. So I was really interested in that, in sort of communities that can offer support but slowly remove your agency.
Corrosive is an excellent word. I love that you said that, because once you said it, I can see how that sort of ties it all together for sure. I do want to talk a little bit about Allison as well, and more about the theme of women being sort of silenced and punished for their perceived right, and how that is very central to witchcraft lore, especially from
Yeah.
days gone by. I love how you explored that. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about exploring that, both past and also present a little bit as well, I think, for me.
Yeah, so I love writing about power. I think it's one of the reasons why I'm really drawn to writing about witch trials, and witches. Of course, the supernatural and the magic element is just the icing on the cake, but the element of power is really, really interesting. And I'm always fascinated by the different ways in which I see this issue being reinvented and undermined and recoded in some ways. I've been recently researching the Malleus Maleficarum, which is a book. It's Latin for the Hammer of All Witches. It was written in 15 or published in 1486 by a Dominican monk called Heinrich Kramer. And I actually think this text, it's super, super, super misogynistic. I mean, it's really crazy to read the translation. It's just all about how women are witches, and women are witches because they're inherently evil and they're born liars, etc., etc. And he goes on like this for an entire book. It's really something to read. So I think I'm really interested in those kind of influences, because even though that book was published in Germany in 1486, I think it actually inspired the Scottish witch trials, which were predominantly women. And notably, James VI went on to publish his own kind of treatise, the same as, very similar to Malleus Maleficarum. It's called Demonology, and he proposes his quite similar theology. But they're so, again, so corrosive, because these beliefs, once they're written down and so on and spread, they really held sway, I think, over a lot of people's mindsets, and they tap into this real deep fear about what happens if someone who is evil holds power, which is, I think, it brings us back to that idea of what power is. And in this case, it was about evil. It was about the prevalent belief that women, and also people of the so-called lower classes, people who were seen as on the fringes of society, what if they hold a power that, that grants them the ability to do things? Well, we must smash them down. And it's really, that's the narrative about, when you think about witch trials and when you research them, the narrative is about oppression and making sure we take away
Mhm.
power from people that another group of people thinks they shouldn't hold that power.
Totally agree with that. I think you touched on this a little bit, but I'm kind of curious what you would say was probably the most challenging aspect of writing this novel, and how you overcame it. I think you said, well, I'll let you talk. I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I suppose the challenging aspect was just writing about two characters who were, locked up in some way.
Right.
That doesn't give me a lot of chance as a novelist to do much if I've already created a situation where they are either in prison or in a hospital room. So I had to just make sure that I was continually moving the narrative forward. The other thing was about making sure that in the witch narrative, that when I was exploring, I've said that I always wanted to write about Alison Balfour. I found her trial to be so moving and awful, you know. And actually, I'm so glad that I wrote about her, not just to get rid of that itch that I wanted to write about her, but when I followed my instinct and researched, the sort of deep diving I did into research was where I drew the story from. So one of the things was I spoke with Professor Julian Goodare, who's a expert. He's an expert on the witch trials, and he's actually based in Edinburgh, which is really close to me. But he is absolutely brilliant. And one of the things he said that struck him about this particular trial was that the only reason that we know about this trial and that we know about Alison Balfour's story at all is because not because we have records of the trial as it happened. We've none of that, actually. I was quite surprised. All that we have is her retraction of her confession before she was burned at the stake. So someone took down a notary didn't take down the rest of the trial, but someone took down her retraction. And it's a very interesting. I hadn't really thought when he said this how interesting it was that the retraction was recorded, because it wouldn't serve anyone if her retraction was recorded. They would want her confession, but not when she says, actually, I didn't mean it when I confessed. And he said it always struck him that they had lost control of the trial. And I thought, yes, you're absolutely right. So the more kind of research I did into the social context, I did spend a lot of time researching Orcadian history, probably too much. And I did have to have a word with myself. I was like, Carolyn, you got to stop. There has to be, you got to just write the thing. You can't research. This is not a PhD thesis, but I really did. And actually, I'm pleased that I did, because it brought out her agency. So the problem I had at first was thinking, okay, I do find it really fascinating that she was in this position, that it's terrible what she experienced, but how do I create a story around this? I was really worried that I would fail in that regard, but actually doing the research around the social context and the political context of the trial brought it all out, and I was so relieved. But there was a touch and go moment. I thought it might just be a story where all this stuff happens to someone and it just happens and that's it. But it's not a pro feminist story if it's just if she's the passive subject.
As I was reading through the story and all of these moments were playing out, I was obviously just glued to the page. But then I got to your author's note at the end and reading through all of the research that you did, and as expected, you did not disappoint when it comes to the research. But that was what was fascinated me as well. And I'm glad you brought it up. It was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask is her retraction and how that sort of led to, being a very important piece of information, I think, in all of this. So I love the research. So
yeah,
sure.
I think when I went up to Orkney I was told that they had a really great archive there, that they had kept really good trial records of what happened in Orkney during those witch trials. I mean, we're talking a really long time ago. It's the 1500s.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really surprised when I went into the archives, because I requested these documents and they bring out these ancient letters from 1555, like folded up a million times. You have to open it and it's all this writing that you can barely read because it's in old, some of it's in Latin, and I didn't have gloves on. I wasn't in like an air conditioned unit looking at these things under glass. I was just in this library accessing these really fragile 500-year-old documents. I was like, oh, what if I rip this, or what if someone else rips it? We need to protect these. But actually, maybe it's not surprising that we don't have the trial records are there, but they're not. They didn't care about writing down everything the women said. Some of the trial records are there verbatim, but they didn't care about documenting what the women said. It was just about, yeah, it's they were seen as witches from the moment they were accused.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a central theme. The moment the accusation comes out, that there was never really an opportunity to escape it. I mean, I
No.
I'm curious, has there ever been a situation or a time in which someone did escape the accusation? And I
Yes,
don't
and
know.
I'm writing about it. I'm
Okay.
writing about it right now. It's the novel I'm working on, which is really
All right.
exciting. And
Well, excellent.
there were some instances as well. Like, so there was a witch trial near me. I'm pointing as if you can see,
It's
but
right there.
about 20 minutes down the road from me, there was a famous witch trial called the Bargaran witch trial, and it was a young boy? It was a young person accused all these people, and I think 8 were finally put on trial, but the other people who were sort of accused bought their way out of the trial. So
Oh, wow.
it's telling, I think, that you have instances where people could just, slip a few £100 or whatever it was and get off scot free.
And I will say, and this, I'm going to be careful here because I don't want to reveal too much, but there's a moment in the story, in Allison's story, um, where, and it's going back to what you said about them losing control of the trial and of the narrative. There's a moment where I thought it was going to turn for her as well, and it's with her son. When her son is
Yeah,
brought into court, and so, and
yeah.
I think to a degree in the story, you would know, you're the author, but I think to a degree it did start to turn a little bit for her in that regard. So, but
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the questions you have to ask yourself with when writing about witch trials, and this is one of the other things I had to really revisit, was why she didn't confess earlier. I had to really think, well, why didn't she? Like, it's we all know that the outcome, they would have known that the outcome is death. If they confess, they're not going to be let off. Although in her case, it's interesting because she was promised that she would be let off if she just confessed. So I really had to dig in, and actually this is where the sort of external research, because I had to think about context. I think, well, what could possibly cause her not to confess? If the members of her family are being threatened with torture, well, surely you would just confess. Why not? Especially if they've been promising you that you'll get off. So there had to be a reason. She had to have a very good reason not to. So I had to really look at the situation to get a feel for that.
so what would you say, in your opinion, is the most pivotal point in the book or the story? Is there a moment that you think the audiences should look forward to? Obviously, without spoilers. And I had several, but I think my ultimate is probably the last chapter. So, because
Oh,
I
really?
loved how that happened, and I was like, what? So
Oh, it's a tough one to say so, or to choose without giving spoilers. Oh, I'm not sure. I think I wanted to give a vibe. So I suppose when Clem and Quinn go to Orkney and they do their own kind of research, I wanted to really create a sense of something quite old and outside of time, and a belief system that has continued in a practices. I'm really fascinated because although I write about cults here, or a cult, I'm also really fascinated in pagan groups such as Druids. And I'm not saying that maybe there's cults in those groups too. I don't know. Cults are all around us, aren't they? But I'm really fascinated by paganism, really fascinated by pagan practice and the connection they have with nature and the way they view nature. So I was really keen to write about a group that continues those in a non-culty way.
I agree with you. I degree as well, I'm very fascinated by paganism and their connection to nature and how that all ties together. I have been for a very long time. So,
Mm.
how is the writing process for this book compared to other books, in particular, The Lighthouse Witches or even A Haunting in the Arctic? Or were there challenges or surprises that you encountered along the way? And how did you
Um,
overcome that?
Anne Enright said years ago, she said, a book always fails at some point, and that has reassured me through every book that I've ever written, because every book that I've ever written has had at least a moment, if not maybe a few months, where it has just felt like, I don't know how I'm going to fix this. I don't know. It feels broken. It feels like I've just hit a problem that doesn't feel, it feels like it's integral. It's like you're building a physical wall and you've actually caused a fracture, or you've used the wrong bricks or something like this, that it's integral, that it's so deep that the only way to fix it is to kind of delete the whole thing and start over. But so I've always hit this really awful, I think in this book, I think it was just, I really thought, I'm writing two characters who have no agency. Oh my god, what am I going to do about that? But it always surprises me that these things are fixable. It's about developing a creativity. That's what creativity is, actually. It's about finding, oh God, I've got a problem, and then you have to find a solution to it. And it has to be creative, but it has to be believable. It has to fit with the rest of the novel in tone, in logic, all those kinds of things. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, but I think you do get better at
Well, I think you've done it here. I love it. So it's really great. So
it.
you told us a little bit about what you're working on next, but what is next for you, CJ? Is there anything you can share with us today that we should look forward to?
Oh yeah, so I am working on another witch trial book. Um, so it's funny because even though I write standalones, I do think that when I am writing something and researching it, there's always something that comes up that I want to explore further. That's what happened. I came across a witch trial in 1485 in Innsbruck, in what is now Germany. No, not Germany, Austria. Forgive me. And I had to write about this character that we again only have a very kind of small amount of information on, but it's such dynamic information that I just thought, oh, I have to write this. This is brilliant. So I went over to Innsbruck in April, and I was a bit nervous about going, actually, because I thought, I mean, I was only going for like 6 days, but still trying to, take time away, and the expense and everything. I thought, should I go? Am I actually is it gonna be worth it? Because I'm writing about this period in the 1400s. What's going to be there that's going to tell me anything about the story? Actually, the old town of Innsbruck is still there, and the buildings that were either just built or in the process of being built in this exact period were there, even the town hall where the trial took place. So I was so pleased, so thrilled that that was the case, and I did get a lot from that trip. It's every time I would write, I have Innsbruck in my mind, and the way it is, and it just brought it to life for me. So yeah, so this time there is no dual narrative, so it's just a historical fiction piece, which is kind of a first. But yeah, I've just loved writing the story. I'm nearly finished with it, but it'll be out next year.
Oh, that's great. I will definitely I'm excited and I'll keep an eye out for it. So the
Cool.
book is called The Book of Witching. It is available everywhere in the US on October 8th, and the UK, I believe you said on the 10th, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Great. And as we always like to say here at Quills and Chills, please support your local bookstores whenever possible. So, CJ, remind our audience how they can find you on social media.
So I'm on Twitter or X. I can't call it X.
I call it Twitter.
It's at, oh yeah, right. What is X?
I-
At C J Cooke. And then Instagram, I think CJ Cooke _author. And I have a website, which is carolynjesscooke.com.
Great. And I'll include all of those on the show notes as well as on screen for this part as well. So, CJ, I am thrilled that you came back to talk to me today about this book. I'm very excited about it. So I appreciate you being here very, very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, you guys, that's it. We'll see you next time on Quills and Chills. Bye. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Quills and Chills. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the mysterious and the haunted. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to support us by subscribing on your preferred podcast platform and leaving us a rating or review, because your feedback helps keep those chills running down both our spines. And feel free to share the show with your favorite fellow horror enthusiasts. Also, if you guys have any spooky stories, strange encounters, or paranormal experiences of your own, I'd love to hear them. Reach out to me on social media or email me at quillsandchillspodcast@gmail.com. Who knows? Your story might end up on a very special episode. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you back here next time on Quills and Chills. Bye, y'all.